Good evening, everyone. This is Skinny E Media here with another brilliant interview on our hands for the Annecy Film Festival that will be occurring from the 13th to the 18th of June. We have here Senor Carlos Hagerman, who's here to discuss about Home is Somewhere Else, which I saw a little before the festival, and I thought it was an excellent piece of animation and also documentary storytelling about the lives of Mexican American youth and the struggles that they deal with through the immigration system. How do you do then, Senor Hagerman? ¿Cómo estás?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here and talking with everyone and being able to share this experience of having this film at the wonderful Annecy International Animation Film Festival.
It was definitely, I would say, the Cannes Film Festival or the TIFF or Toronto of animation in of itself. It's a privilege to even get the press privileges to even cover some of the films and works that they've been showcasing. I have done one for Charlotte by Tahirana and Eric Varen, and then a few shorts from Office National du Film du Canada or National Film Board. But I think your work was the one that stood out to me the most because of the timely conversations that we've been having recently about immigration, be it legal or illegal. Right now in Los Angeles, we have the Summit of the Americas, and Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, and a few leaders, they were put off of it or they just didn't want to attend because of certain hypocrisy in the laws and whatnot. Now, this may not tie necessarily to the film in of itself, but it is a point of political conversation, as the film is very much a story that could be quite divisive to some people, but I think it's a story of human adversity against all odds. So I wanted to tell you, first off, how the project came about.
Well, I'm not new to the subject of migration. My first feature documentary 12 years ago was about the emotional cost of immigration, but from the Mexican point of view, how Mexican families dealt with the ones that stayed, that were not there. So how it was called Those Who Stay Behind. And I always wondered, how could we tell the story of the ones who left, and how was their lives? Because we just imagine their lives being better because they went into a great adventure, as we often think about these things, to have a better life, to have a better future for their families. And this is kind of the myth. And right now, Home is Somewhere Else is telling the stories of those who left Mexico, but also those who were born in the United States, also those who were brought to the United States as children, and also those who have been growing up in the United States, but have been deported back to Mexico, a country that they don't call home. Of course, the movie is structured to give you a wide experience, a wide spectrum of what does it feel like to live and to grow up in a family of undocumented members. And I think that even though this belongs very much to the context of the US-Mexico binational relationship, this is what's happening all around the world. Migration is happening all around the world. And it's happening not only because countries don't offer a future to the families that live inside these countries, but it has also to do with those countries that have been enriched by activities outside of their own countries that are welcoming families, but maybe not welcoming the members of the families into their societies. So this is very urgent because as we speak, there's millions of families around the world that are living in a country that they are calling home at the moment, but they didn't call home at the beginning of what it meant to be a family. And if we don't overlook, if we don't like cast an eye into what they're feeling, we're going to miss an opportunity of building up societies that are welcome and empathic to diversity.
I think that is absolutely a great point that you've just delivered. Not only the struggles just trying to get there, but also the relations through the country that you're there, the host country, versus the one that you originated from. We have been seeing that quite a great deal over the years, not just within the US-Mexico border, but also the current Ukraine conflict, where people are fleeing war and famine as we speak for Europe. Some of them even before the war, and after Crimea, even settled in Russia, and many of them are also fearing for their lives as well in their country. And the Rohingya, who fled from Bangladesh to Myanmar, and the fears that they had to undergo through violent junta forces in Myanmar, and the eventual dissolution of the democracy or the republic that was going on there. So this is in many ways quite a universal story. I think it's very important to highlight the fact that the film is told within the perspective of 3 different stories. Now, just to sum things up for everyone a little bit, the first 2 stories deal with young women and their history, their struggles, and then the third one deals with a young man and his struggles. The first one is her willingness to just even survive, and the second one, she has a person that she knows that lives in Estados Unidos versus her being here, and then the third one, he lives in Salt Lake City, but then he's eventually deported. He eventually is caught because he was protesting against racial profiling, and also his bike went collapse. Is it wrong to say that the best segment for me is the third one? I don't know. That's just me.
I think that
They're all really important stories.
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, we constructed a narrative towards that. If you, with a very infantile view on the subject matter, it's just the very basic fear of being separated from your parents when you're a child. And of course, this is very less dramatic because it's told from the point of view of a child. And then we go into a second story, which is the story of young women, 20 years old, trying to figure out what the future ahead can bring to them. What are their dreams and what are their nightmares or their fears about the future in a very different migration status? So this is something that when you are a teenager, you end high school, you're always wondering what's going to become of you anyway, right? But what if you add the element of you're undocumented and your sister isn't? What does that do to a family? Is the family makes responsible the US citizen of their future as a whole family? What's that weight that you need to carry? You know, like, we have done everything for you. Now, what are you going to become? Or sorry, you're undocumented, you're not going to become much, you know? And then the third story, of course, is the evolution of these two stories. Because the third character, the third protagonist, Jose Eduardo el Deportee, has gone over the previous two stages before we start his story. He has been a child that is afraid of losing her parents, and he has lost his father, so he knows what it means. He has been in that spot where he is asked, what's your future is going to become? And he has been rejected from a scholarship because he's undocumented. So he has gone through these previous stages. So by the time you start the third story, you are prepared to make this the climatic story of the film. So yes, the third story is the strongest, the most dramatic, but it's not a third story. It is his own story that has been developed through other stories. So this is a whole story. This is a whole spectrum of what it feels to actually belong to an undocumented family.
I would absolutely agree with that. And the fact that it even depicts several perspectives in the migrant lives of children is, I think, the best thing about it, because now you have an enriching tale to tell to young people who perhaps may watch this maybe on like a streaming service or even in schools and universities. Definitely provides talking points that really need to be said. And I also was a fan of the use of narration and interludes that happen in the beginning, before the second and before the third and toward the end, highlighting El Deportee and his ways of seeing the struggle, and then into reflecting it with English y Espanol simultaneously. In many ways, it kind of reminded me of, don't take this wrong, of Lin-Manuel Miranda. He done a similar sort of thing on Hamilton and In the Heights, but I think you've done it much more effectively on Home is Somewhere Else. Was that a part of the idea?
Yeah. One thing that I know that this is an animated documentary. We pursued that. But in many ways, it's an anti-documentary as well. Documentaries usually tend to try to be objective, try to give, a realistic and comprehensible context about what the reality is about, right? So there's this use of archives and historic context, and there's this use of statistics and research that give the audience the feeling that the documentary is telling the truth. It's not a fiction, it's the truth. So this is not an objective documentary. This is a subjective documentary. A subjective documentary because it tells the stories from a subjective point of view, from an intimate point of view, from the point of view of the protagonists. And I'm underlining protagonists because they are not characters. Characters are those that belong to a fiction film. They are made up by the screenplay writer, and they are made up by the director, and they are made up by the actors. What you're going to hear, what you're going to experience in Home is Somewhere Else is the real conversations, the real interviews with the real people that have lived the situation. So it is their point of view that is important, and we, the directors, as storytellers of this film, must give the main point of view to them, not to us. So it was kind of organic to have José Eduardo el Deportee as the main master of ceremonies. He's a brilliant spoken word artist. So he could, and nobody like he could, introduce this film, introduce each of the stories, because he knows these stories. Even though it's not his story, he has lived through the same situation in the same context. And him being a poet, he wrote these poems that introduce each story by himself. We were not part of that creative process. We just asked him, could you do this for the film, not for us? And then, so he becomes the real narrator of this film. And we are only, as directors and as artists, as animators, as composed artists, as music composer, sound designers, everybody is trying to be in the service of the protagonists, not of the directors.
I'd agree that's a very good assessment of the characters, or actually I would refer to them as the subjects that are in question, by not imposing some sort of weird artistic license, except for the animation, and letting them tell their stories gives it an air of authenticity that we very much need, because in all honesty, Hollywood has a funny way of establishing people's stories and trying to mesh it in a way that makes them look like the good guys, or sanitizes or tones down certain elements. And I'm very grateful for the animated documentary or animatory, just saying it for what it is. I know, let's face it, a lot of people on the political right wing, those who don't support illegal immigration or undocumented dreamers, or even more parents who assume that all animation is just for children, they may take this quite the wrong way. But children are going to get to a point in their lives, be they 10 or 12 or 14, where they're going to start realizing something isn't right in the world. They're going to start questioning. And when you get to that age, I'm sure even younger, your mind ravels like a puzzle and you start becoming more inquisitive. And I think that's very important. I know in many ways, when it does come out for more general release, some people will say that this is just a Mexican version of the movie Flea or Waltz of Bashir. But I think there's a little bit more to it than just being a replica of those films. This is a completely different story. This isn't the story of a refugee living in Denmark or an Israeli officer telling about his stories when he fought in the war with Lebanon, with Israel. I don't know what your take is on that.
Well, of course, we have to say that Waltz with Bashir was an incredible movie that made us all think, how can we incorporate animation to documentary filmmaking? And this planted a seed that we cannot take away. We have seen Waltz with Bashir, we knew about this film, and that in a way pushed not this film, but many other films that have used animation. It's a very different film though, because Waltz with Bashir, although it has incredible, let's say, eerie moments, mostly is a rotoscope of the real interviews that the director made with those who accompanied him on that battle. And that was enough to set up a standard and an incredible narrative. If you're talking about Flea, which is now this fantastic film that just came out, and in many countries is still coming out. In Mexico, it's still in theaters now. Well, actually, we had never seen the film before we did this film. We were doing this film simultaneously, and it just came out 1 year before we did, which means that if we have been working for 5 years on this film, they had been working for 6 years on this film. They started before us. But I have to say, Flea is an incredibly beautiful film, an incredibly good animation, but it deals with the same story we have been told for decades, which is the story of Ulysses, the story of someone that goes into the adventure, coming out from a hardship into a paradise, a country that welcomes, and then everything is fine. And that's where the movie ends. And this story is not about that. This story begins with the end of Flea. It's not about the struggle of getting oneself from a terrible place into the paradise that we are dreaming of. It is about how does it feel to live in paradise? Is it really paradise? How can we make paradise lose its romantic concept and become a real opportunity for families that are searching for better lives for their families? How does this feel? This is important. It's not as dramatic because it's everyday lives, but it is very important because societies will have to live with the thousands of generations of children that are growing up in the UK, in France, in the US, everywhere that migration is taking place today. There are families that are coming and will change their society. So we want to be empathic with those families, or we want to be wanting nothing to change. And this is a big question, because if you make this question when you are a teenager and you realize that you can be empathic with a family of the student that is studying in your class a few desks from you, then you would become an adult that would try to understand that reality, and you will have a society versed in diversity, versed in humanizing relationships without the categorizing of you're a migrant, you're not a migrant. And besides, who isn't a migrant today in this world?
Most people had to come from somewhere. Just the founding of America in of itself, the indigenous population, the Sioux, the Apache, then came the Europeans, and then came the slaves from West Africa by force, and then the generations of other immigrants and refugee populations that came to the US, finding many success in it, but also finding plenty of struggle because of racism and discrimination and social exclusion put on the part to ensure certain elements of power are still in place. I'm glad that you went out of your way in the film to speak about the inherent issues that are within the United States, because everyone likes to think that this is la tierra de oportunidad, but it's not always quite the case. Even I, for myself, because I am British and American, I've struggled to find my place in society as well. And in my time in the US, I've often felt a little of an outsider, and my years at university wasn't as good as they could have been. And you know, seeking employment, I thought, oh, I was going to get this whole sort of job and whatnot, but that didn't happen. So, which led me to create Skinny E Media because of all the sort of pitfalls. I don't actually get paid for this. I'm actually doing this for free and on my own volition because I love what I do. It's the same with El Deportee, as his finds a purpose in telling slam poetry by getting out of the horrors and the struggle that he's dealing with and expressing it through art and media, which I think is the power that it comes with art and inspiration. And I think by making Home is Somewhere Else animated, it adds an extra layer to the audience that, oh, because there's a tendency for audiences to switch off if it's live action or if they think it's some sort of political propaganda piece. This isn't that, but that's what I've heard from some people. And by using animation, not only can you access more younger audiences, but also you can get all people's attention because of the artistic merit and value. And I certainly got that out of it. I don't have children, but if I had 12-year-old, I would definitely show them this work over Encanto or Frozen. Disney has no monopoly on animation, or even the. But you get the idea, and I'm very glad you, Senor Hagerman and Senor Villalobos, and the team that made this work made it very possible. It's a story that needs to be said. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time left on my hands, but I'm very glad that you stopped on by. I was going to ask when you get to Annecy, what do you plan to do while you're there? You're not too far away from the French and Swiss border.
Well, for us and for the 75 artists that worked to make this possible, it is a great honor to be in Annecy, just because it is the most important animation film festival in the world, and they are recognizing our work by inviting us to be in the competitive section Counterchamp. There's only 10 films there. There's only 2 feature film animation section, each with 10 films. So for a small animation studio in Mexico, in a small town, 2 hours away from the city, to have been able to produce a film that can be featured and having its world premiere in this important festival is very important for the artists that gave all their work and more to be to dream of being there. And I think that this is a way that we can produce feature film animations around the world if you're a small animation studio. What we did is we got together with other small animation studios and we made a collective effort. And I think that this world today is about collective efforts. And if we can do this in animation, we can do it in many other things. So yes, I feel that we are very lucky to be there, but at the same time, I feel that if this is a platform that the world can hear about the stories of these families, let the world hear about them.
Very important words indeed. Like I said earlier on, sometimes animation has the power to get the message across a little bit more than if it was like a regular live action documentary by, let's say, Oliver Stone or Michael Moore. And I'm very glad of all the hard work that has been put into this project. I'll certainly tell a lot more people about it when you hopefully do, at least maybe, I hope, get the buying rights to this work and air it like on PBS or CBC or Channel 4 in the UK. But we can only hope and pray. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we have left. And I want to say this in the most Spanish I do know. Muchas gracias para hacer la entrevista. Esta muy oportunidad de vos hablar. Buen trabajo, su animación.
Muchas gracias.
De nada. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.